All right, so are you ready to dive into some really heavy stuff today?
Yeah.
We're tackling a topic that's both fascinating and honestly uh, pretty disturbing. The
Okay.
Ku Klux Klan. I know we're
Yeah.
not exactly a light dinner conversation,
Right.
but I think it's important to understand this part of our history,
Yeah.
even the dark and ugly bits.
Absolutely.
It's like that saying,
Yeah.
those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. For this deep dive, we're going to be relying on insights from Christopher Alfett's book,
Okay.
The Ku Klux Klan, an American History.
Okay.
He offers a pretty comprehensive look at the Klan,
All right.
from its surprising origins,
Yeah.
its enduring legacy.
And speaking of surprising origins,
Yeah.
get this.
Okay.
The KKK started as a social club
Really?
formed by 6 bored Confederate veterans in Tennessee
Wow.
back in 1865.
Huh.
I mean, can you imagine? This organization that would become synonymous with terror and hate started with a bunch of guys just hanging out.
Wow.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is a bit ironic,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
But it speaks to the fact that even the most horrific movements often have very mundane beginnings.
Right.
According to Alfit, these former soldiers were, in a way, grappling with a loss of identity after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Their world had been turned upside down,
Okay.
and they were looking for a sense of belonging and purpose.
So they were just a bunch of guys missing the camaraderie of their wartime days.
Right?
And things spiraled out of control from there.
Yeah.
But seriously, where did the name Ku Klux Klan even come from?
Yeah.
It's such a bizarre,
Yeah.
almost otherworldly name.
There are a few theories.
Okay.
Some more credible than others.
Okay.
One links the name to a Native American legend about ghostly figures who terrorize people.
Right.
This connection makes sense when you consider the Klan's tactics of using costumes and secrecy to intimidate.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
Right.
These figures in Native American lore would wear white sheets and frighten people,
Yeah.
and the Klan basically copied that for their own sinister purposes.
Yeah, that imagery and the psychological impact are undeniable.
Yeah.
But Alfit suggests a less exciting,
Okay.
but perhaps more plausible explanation.
Okay.
He believes the name is likely a play on words,
Okay.
drawing inspiration from college fraternities.
Oh, really?
Ku Klux might come from the Greek word kyklos,
Okay.
meaning circle.
So even hate groups can have mundane, almost silly origins.
Right.
I guess Greek life was influential even back then.
Mm.
Who knew?
Yeah,
But we know this group didn't stay harmless for long.
right.
What does Alfit say about how they transitioned from a social club to a force of terror?
It was a rapid transformation,
Oh.
fueled by the tumultuous social and political climate of the Reconstruction era.
Okay.
The South was in shambles after the Civil War, and white Southerners were grappling with the end of slavery and the rise of Black political and social power.
So basically the KKK capitalized on this widespread fear and uncertainty.
Exactly.
Okay.
They positioned themselves as protectors of the Old South,
Mm-hmm.
vowing to restore white supremacy and resist the changes brought about by Reconstruction.
Wow.
And they quickly resorted to violence to achieve their goals.
Their main target was the 14th Amendment, right?
Yes.
The one granting citizenship and voting rights to Black Americans.
That's right. Okay.
The 14th Amendment was a direct challenge to the South's entire social and political structure
Right.
for the KKK.
Yeah.
It represented everything they opposed.
Yeah.
It threatened their sense of power and privilege.
It's chilling to think about how a piece of legislation aimed at equality could provoke such a violent backlash.
Mm.
You'd think the government would have stepped in and shut them down immediately.
Yeah,
But it wasn't that simple, was it?
not at all.
Where?
President Grant faced a complex situation.
He was hesitant to use federal force in the South. He didn't want to reignite the divisions of the Civil War
Mm-hmm.
or appear to be occupying the former Confederacy.
Oh,
Plus, the nation's attention was shifting westward,
okay.
with expansion and economic opportunities taking center stage.
So the focus on westward expansion sort of allowed the KKK to fade into the background.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
Public interest in the South waned,
Yeah.
and the federal government's response to the Klan's violence was, at best, inconsistent.
Okay.
This gave the KKK room to operate,
Yeah.
even if they weren't making headlines every day.
And as we'd see, that wouldn't be the last time the KKK would exploit periods of social change to gain power and influence.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a bit.
Heck.
First, let's unpack Alfit's analysis of the Klan's early tactics and messaging.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't just about brute force, was it?
Definitely not.
Okay.
The KKK understood the power of propaganda and spectacle.
Okay.
They used intimidation,
Mm-hmm.
symbolism,
Right.
and misinformation to spread their message and sow fear.
Okay, let's dig into that.
Yeah.
How did they use those tactics to gain a foothold in the post-Civil War South?
Well,
What specific anxieties were they playing on?
one of the key anxieties they exploited was the fear of black economic competition.
Okay.
Alfit points out that many white Southerners were deeply resentful of the newfound economic opportunities available to black citizens.
So it wasn't just about racial prejudice,
Right.
but also about economic anxiety.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
And the KKK very cleverly tapped into those anxieties.
Okay.
They portrayed black economic advancement as a threat to white livelihoods,
Right.
fueling resentment and justifying their violence.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't just economic anxieties they played on.
Right.
The KKK also exploited fears of social upheaval and racial mixing.
The classic protect our way of life argument.
Right.
We see that pop up throughout history, don't we?
Yeah.
So how did that manifest specifically in the post-Civil War South?
Well, one of their major talking points was the supposed threat of black domination.
Okay.
They spread rumors about black men taking over government, taking white women,
What?
and generally upending the social order.
It's all so clearly rooted in fear and prejudice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like they couldn't accept the reality of a changing world.
That's a key insight from Alfit.
Okay.
He argues that the KKK's ideology was, in many ways, a reaction to the trauma of defeat and the loss of a world built on white supremacy.
Right.
They were clinging to a past that was rapidly fading away.
And that clinging to the past, that fear of change, would fuel the Klan's resurgence in the decades to come.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, let's shift gears to the 1920s,
Okay.
an era that saw the KKK rise to a level of power and influence they hadn't achieved before.
Mm-hmm.
What was different this time around?
Well, for starters, the Klan in the 1920s was a much more organized and sophisticated operation. They weren't just a collection of scattered cells operating in the shadows. They had a national structure,
Okay.
a clear agenda,
Mm-hmm.
and, as you mentioned earlier, a marketing plan.
A marketing plan
Yeah.
for a hate group.
Mm-hmm.
That's both disturbing and oddly impressive.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
It involved things like membership drives, rallies, parades,
Really?
and even a women's auxiliary.
Wow.
They were actively promoting their ideology
Okay.
and trying to present themselves as a mainstream organization.
It's chilling to think about.
Yeah,
But what really helped them gain traction in the 1920s was that film, wasn't it?
Right.
Birth of a Nation.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That film was a game changer for the KKK.
Right.
It romanticized their history,
Wow.
portraying them as heroes, protecting white Southerners during Reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
And despite its overt racism,
Yeah.
it was a massive commercial success, even being screened at the White House.
It's crazy to think about how a single film could have such a profound impact on public perception.
Yeah.
It just shows you the power of media even back then.
Right.
But the Klan in the 1920s wasn't just focused on the South anymore, was it?
Yeah.
Their targets had expanded.
That's right.
Okay.
They broadened their message to appeal to a wider audience,
Mm-hmm.
tapping into broader anxieties about immigration, urbanization, and social change.
Okay.
They weren't just anti-Black anymore.
Right.
They were anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish,
Wow.
anti-anything that challenged their narrow vision of America.
It's the same playbook we see used by hate groups today, isn't it?
Yeah,
Exploiting those existing fears and prejudices to push their agenda.
right.
So with this expanded platform and message, what was the extent of their influence in the 1920s?
It was significant.
Okay.
At its peak, the Klan had an estimated 4 million members.
Mm.
They held elected offices, influenced legislation,
Right.
and exerted considerable social and political power.
That's incredible.
For a time, it seemed like they were on the verge of becoming a truly mainstream force in American society.
It's a pretty terrifying thought.
Yeah.
But thankfully, their reign of power didn't last forever, did it?
No.
What led to their downfall?
Well, a few things.
Okay.
First, their own hypocrisy eventually caught up with them.
Sure.
There were numerous scandals involving Klan leaders engaging in criminal activity,
Right.
financial corruption, and
Hmm.
even sexual misconduct,
Wow.
all while preaching morality and family values.
So basically, they were as crooked as the day is long.
Right.
Talk about not practicing what you preach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as those scandals came to light,
Right.
public support for the Klan began to erode.
Hmm.
People started to see them for what they truly were.
Yeah.
A corrupt and violent organization masking their bigotry behind a veneer of respectability.
But it wasn't just internal factors that contributed to their decline, was it?
Right.
Didn't the government also start cracking down on them?
Yes, that played a role as well. Law enforcement agencies, particularly the FBI, began to investigate and prosecute Klan members for their criminal activities.
Right.
And as their crimes were exposed, public opinion turned even further against them.
It's almost a relief to hear that,
Yeah.
knowing that they didn't just fade away quietly into the night.
Right.
But as we know, the Klan story doesn't end there, does it?
Sadly, no.
Right.
As we've seen throughout their history, the Klan thrives on periods of social upheaval and change.
Yeah.
And what greater upheaval was there than the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s?
Yeah, that was a time of tremendous progress, but also intense backlash.
Right.
How did the Klan respond to this push for racial equality?
With violence, as they had so many times before,
Right.
they saw the civil rights movement as an existential threat.
Yeah.
And they lashed out with a ferocity that shocked even those accustomed to their brutality.
And that brings us to one of the darkest chapters in the Klan's history.
Right.
A chapter marked by bombings, murders,
Yeah.
and acts of unspeakable cruelty.
It's awful.
Let's talk about the impact of the Klan on the civil rights movement.
Okay.
What does Alfred highlight as some of the key events and tactics of this era? It's hard to even fathom the level of hate and violence directed at those fighting for basic civil rights. What does Alfred say about how the KKK specifically targeted the civil rights movement?
He points to a number of tactics. Intimidation was, of course, a mainstay.
Right.
They would hold rallies, burn crosses, and make threats to try and scare activists and their supporters.
Yeah, those images are seared into our collective memory, aren't they? Those burning crosses, those hooded figures. It's like something out of a nightmare.
It was a deliberate strategy to instill fear and discourage people from participating in the movement, but it went far beyond symbolism. They also engaged in violence, sometimes escalating to murder.
The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 is a chilling example. 4 young girls killed during Sunday school. It's just heartbreaking.
That event really shook the nation and galvanized support for the civil rights movement. It exposed the true nature of the Klan's ideology, that they were willing to resort to any means necessary to maintain white supremacy.
And it wasn't just bombings. There were countless incidents of beatings, kidnappings, and murders targeting civil rights workers and black communities. It's hard to believe this was happening in our country not that long ago.
Alfred emphasizes that this wasn't just random violence. It was a coordinated campaign of terror designed to suppress black voting, maintain segregation, and uphold the existing power structure.
It's so disturbing, but despite the Klan's efforts, the civil rights movement gained momentum, leading to landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. How did the Klan react to these legislative defeats?
They were furious, of course, but it also marked a turning point in their history. Public opinion had shifted dramatically, and the federal government was no longer willing to tolerate their violence. Law enforcement agencies stepped up their efforts to infiltrate and dismantle Klan groups, and the movement began to fragment and decline.
So we see a pattern here. The Klan rises during times of social change, exploiting fear and prejudice to gain power. But eventually they overreach their hypocrisy and violence are exposed, and they face a backlash. It's almost like a cycle.
Alfred argues that the Klan's decline in the late 20th century mirrors that of other extremist groups throughout history. They thrive on attention and division, but they ultimately crumble under the weight of their own contradictions and the strength of those who oppose them.
So where does the Klan stand today? Are they still a threat?
Well, they still exist, but they are a shadow of their former selves. Membership is down significantly, and they are largely marginalized and fractured. They're more of a pathetic remnant than a powerful force.
It's tempting to just dismiss them as a bunch of irrelevant old guys clinging to outdated ideas. But is that the right approach?
Alfred cautions against complacency. While the Klan may not have the same influence as they once did, their hateful ideology still circulates, finding new adherents online and in extremist circles. And as we've seen throughout history, even small groups can inflict tremendous damage.
So what's the best way to combat this lingering threat? Should we be debating their ideas, trying to change their minds?
Debating with white supremacists is rarely productive. It often gives them a platform and legitimizes their views. Alfred suggests that the most effective way to fight the Klan and their ideology is through education, understanding their tactics, and exposing their hateful rhetoric.
So basically shining a light on their darkness.
Exactly. We need to learn from history, recognize the warning signs, and be prepared to challenge prejudice and discrimination wherever we encounter it.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about being not racist. It's about actively fighting against racism and all forms of hate.
Right. Absolutely. We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We have to be active participants in creating a more just and equitable society.
You know, one thing that has really struck me throughout this deep dive is how the KKK has always thrived on division pitting groups against each other. It's almost like their entire ideology is built on exploiting our differences.
That's a really insightful observation. Divide and conquer has always been their strategy. They prey on our fears and insecurities, turning us against each other.
So what's the antidote to that unity solidarity?
Exactly. We need to recognize our shared humanity, build bridges across our differences, and work together to create a society where everyone feels safe and valued.
Wow, that's a powerful message. And I think it's a fitting way to wrap up this deep dive. It's been heavy at times, disturbing, but ultimately I hope it's a call to action.
I agree. We can't erase the past, but we can learn from it and use that knowledge to build a better future. And remember, even though the KKK may be a weakened force today, their ideology still exists. We can't afford to be complacent. We have to stay vigilant and continue fighting for a world where hate has no place.
You heard it here, folks. Let's make sure the KKK and everything they stand for stays firmly in the past. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.